The Chantry teaches us that it is the hubris of men which brought the Darkspawn into our world. The mages had sought to usurp heaven, but instead, they destroyed it. They were cast out, twisted and cursed by their own corruption. They returned as monsters, the first of the Darkspawn. They became a blight upon the lands, unstoppable and relentless. The Dwarven kingdoms were the first to fall, and from the deep roads, the Darkspawn drove at us again and again, until finally we neared annihilation. The Grey Wardens came. Men and women from every race, warriors and mages, barbarians and kings. The Grey Wardens sacrificed everything to stem the tide of darkness and prevail. It has been 4 centuries since that victory, and we have kept our vigil. We have watched and waited for the Darkspawn to return. But those who once called us heroes have forgotten. We are few now, and our warnings have been ignored for too long. I have seen with my own eyes what lies on the horizon. Maker, help us all.
Hello, everybody, and may the Maker watch over you. So, something a little different, and I decided to do this because I've been playing through, on top of, still reading the Star Wars Expanded Universe, I started to play Dragon Age Origins, because I got it on Steam for like $5, along with Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition, which is a fantasy series of video games made by BioWare. For those of you who are EU fans, BioWare also made KOTOR, the first game, and the Old Republic MMO. KOTOR 2 was made by Obsidian, but it's neither here nor there. So you are familiar with them. They also did their own original sci-fi universe called Mass Effect, which I have played and adore. But I will do a video talking about the game itself. I'm not a good game reviewer because I can't really talk about gameplay and stuff because that's not something I'm really an expert in or something I'm really even well aware of. But today I want to talk about something which you could either read after or you could read before you actually play the game, in case you ever wanted to, because the holidays are coming around, and during the holidays on Steam, which is a game buying platform, you can usually things go on sale during the Christmas week, like 90% off. Like Steam has crazy deals, so you can probably get this game for like $5 if you end up being interested. But the novel I have to talk about today is Dragon Age: The Stolen Throne by David Geiger, who I don't think he's written that much, but I do think if I did my research correctly, David Geiger is one of the lead writers on the actual video game itself. So there's that. So, do I think you should necessarily play the game before this? Possibly. I do think you could technically get into this without playing a game. Like, this could be your introduction to some things. It might actually make your experience a bit better. Um, Now, I do think you kind of need at least some contextual understanding of what it is this universe is, because otherwise it's just going to seem like a generic fantasy thing. Because it kind of is a generic story in a more unique world. But I'm gonna leave a link in the description to a video kind of just talking about the history of Thedas, which Thedas is basically Earth. It's Middle Earth. If we're talking about Lord of the Rings, it's just the landmass. Whether that's a planet or whatever, that Thedas is the world you inhabit. And then there's different, countries and stuff. Orlais and Ferelden. Ferelden is where the first game primarily takes place. Um, and so there's different things there, but it goes over the history of the world and pretty much leads up. The video I'll leave in the link in the description basically leads up to, gives you the entire history up until the start of the first game, where your story would begin. Now, this is barely mentioned in that video, which is why I'm going to justify, watching that and then still listening to this. This deals with a king who's no longer a king by the time of the video game. The king is his son. We also deal with an important character in this book who is kind of the main antagonist of the base game. The base game, just to kind of quickly go over that because you kind of need that established, it is a fantasy world. Dwarves exist, elves exist, man exists, there are mages and stuff. Now, elves actually in this setting are the oppressed ones. They're not like Lord of the Rings where they're like super, top tier levels of people. They are actually, second class citizens. They are servants and slaves, and they are treated less most of the time. But in this world, there are these things called the Darkspawn. Now, we have conflicting history stories on what actually went down, and if memory serves me correctly, Inquisition even puts into question some assumptions that were made from the first two games. But the myth, the tale, the idea is that there were a bunch of mages who, they enjoyed using magic, and they got a bit arrogant, got a bit pompous. Think if you know the biblical story, the Tower of Babel, where they wanted to reach the heavens. That's what the mages wanted to do. They wanted to get to heaven with their power, and they did. They managed to make it into heaven, and in doing so, they were corrupted. And then it created these things called archdemons, which are things that there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it, but there's the archdemon and there's the darkspawn. Now the darkspawn are basically like like from Lord of the Rings. You got the orcs. They're not orcs, but they serve a similar purpose where they're just evil. You don't have a good one. They corrupt people, and then you turn into one of those things, and they're kind of just mindless evils that attack until they have an archdemon, which kind of coordinates them into cohesive fighting force. And that will be a thing you have to deal with in the base game. But this takes place before the base game. In this story, we get to deal with a faction that you don't really get to hear about too much in the game, or at least it dives into a little bit more. There is a country called Orlais, and it has this. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I have to try to explain to you without. I definitely think you should probably play the game first, or at least kind of know the basis of it, to kind of enjoy this. Um, in fact, I might just wait to upload this video till after till after I've made my video on the game itself. I don't know, but Orlais is this place where there's this chantry, which is there's so much I'm trying to explain to you, but the chantry is this religious organization. It wants to. It's the world's equivalent of like Catholicism and Christianity, basically, where it's one God created everything, and they want to keep magic in check. But anyway, that's kind of like where that's just like a major religion in Ferelden. It is like a theocracy, like the de facto state religion in Orlais. But Orlais, they usurp the throne of the queen in charge in Ferelden because they want to put a foothold in Ferelden. So there's an emperor in Orlais, but he sends a king or somebody to basically take over the king position to just watch over Ferelden. Um, and so they usurp that. They kill the king. The queen runs away with her son. The queen dies, and that's where we kind of begin the story with the prince with no throne currently because he's on the run, in charge. The reason this prince is rather important is because you have a companion in the base game of Dragon Age Origins that is heavily involved with this backstory in a sense of his lineage. But that's all I'll say there, without getting into spoilers for the base game of Dragon Age Origins. Anyway, that king is King Maric, who goes on to meet a character named Loghain. Now, Loghain, here's the thing. Again, so as I talked about earlier, there's the Darkspawn. They're kind of the main evil threat, like the threat that our heroes must defeat. But there's a human threat, or a human, perhaps not villain, but antagonist. And that antagonist is Teyrn Loghain. And in the game, he's kind of just angry all the time and kind of seems like a stereotypical villain. Um, which is why I kind of do suggest trying to read this before, because there comes a point in the game where you can make certain decisions, and Loghain can actually join your party depending on certain decisions that are made. Um, but I thought, why would I ever do that? He sucks. But this book gives much more nuance to his character, and you get a bit more understanding as to why he feels the way he does, why he's so fervent about it. I mean, he's wrong for doing so, but you understand exactly why he feels the way he does. Um, but we begin the story. Loghain's family, his mom, his dad, or his dad, I should say. Um, they're in the wilds. They're in hiding from the Ferelden government because due to tax evasion. Now it's a lot more deeper than that, but without spoilers, I am not getting into that because that is a whole lot of things. I will have a spoiler section though, but let me just say it is far more than simple tax evasion. Um, but yeah, Maric is on the run because his mother has just been murdered. There is now no more Queen of Ferelden. The king from or the Orlais Emperor has sent a person to kind of watch over Ferelden, and that is King Megren, and he's now the new de facto king of Ferelden. Though he's not the rightful king, of course, because bloodlines and all that. King Maric or Prince Maric should be the one on the throne, but he's on the run, and he runs into Loghain. Um, and so through that, without getting into spoilers, Loghain and him, there'll be kind of a couple year time jumps here. They'll become close friends. They will find a bunch of people, befriend a bunch of people. They will band together. They will defeat the Orlesians who have entered their home, drive them out, and then King Maric will become King Maric, and and Loghain becomes a very important figure in Ferelden, and that's all set up for Dragon Age Origins. Though, like I said, I can completely understand reading this book after the fact, due to the fact, or after the game, because then you kind of already understand the world that you're reading about. But it's also, I think, a nice introduction to the world and gives you new perspective on Loghain as you go into the base game. So I can see you doing it either way. Um, but I think if you're a fan of the game, you will most definitely enjoy this novel. It does feel a bit video gamey at times, and I feel like that's because David Geiger really only writes video game stories. Um, but that's okay. I also felt like the time jumps, kind of like with Jason from Dark Nest, where I understand the progression there, but it should have been shown. That being said, it's only a 400-page book, um, so I can kind of forgive it. But I mean, and it wasn't unbelievable. I believed their friendship. I thought the writing was good enough to justify it. I just they weren't friends, and then they kind of were because a couple years had passed, and they quickly go over like how they kind of got used to one another. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of great character moments in here. Considering that none of these people I know about except for Logain, because Logain's the only character from the games. By the time you start the game, King Merrick has already passed, and none of the other people we hear about are really in it. I mean, there are some cameos, um, but other than that, this is pretty much self-contained, which is why also you can kind of read it before. But if you're a fan of the game, I do think you'll enjoy this novel if you enjoy reading anyway. And if you are not a fan, I do think this could be a good introduction for you into the universe. If you're like, because if you buy the game, like if you buy the Ultimate Edition of the game, you're looking at like 50 hours plus of your time being spent. Do you really want to spend, even if it's only $5, do you want to spend money on a game that's long if you don't feel like you're going to be invested and enjoy that? So I feel like if you want to know if you want to dive into that this is a good introduction to that. A good introduction to letting you see the world, get a little flavor of it, and then if you're like, yeah, I'm kind of digging this, then you can dive in with the whole game. But yeah, without getting into spoilers, yeah, it was a really fun novel. I don't think it's one of the best novels of all time or anything. It definitely feels like a tie-in, I guess. But that being said, there was a lot of scenes that were done really well, and I enjoyed reading it, and I think it's going to enhance my experience of the base game itself. So that is pretty much it, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, sharing helps out a ton. And yes, because this is my channel and I want to have fun, there will be more Dragon Age novels and video game discussions in the future. Of course, Star Wars isn't stopping. This is just something that I've kind of fallen in love with as I started playing through it, and then I started reading a novel by it, and I just wanted to share that with all of you. So yeah, I will do more of these, and yeah, that'll be that. So until next time, guys, if you don't want spoilers, this also applies to the base game of Dragon Age Origins. So if you don't want spoilers for any of that, time to go. If you don't care about spoilers, or you already know everything, stick around. All right, warning, goodbye. Earlier on in the book, Logain brought Merrick back to his camp with his dad and everything. And the Elysians, they're finding him. They're finding Merrick because he's the prince. He has to die. And once there's this really intense scene where Logain figures it out, where his dad's asking, Merrick, "Who are you? Why are they after you? What have you brought to my camp?" And as soon as he realizes that he is the future king, Logain's father kneels down and says, "This is our king." And then, Merrick knights him and stuff like well, that stuff is really good, even though it's kind of generic, it's still good. And then Logain's father sacrifices himself for Merrick and tells Logain, take care of him. As they go into hiding, they meet Flemeth. Because, of course, Flemeth is here. Flemeth is also an interesting character. Very mysterious. Very probably evil, though we're not exactly sure. There's a lot of legends about her. We don't know how much is truth. But she does have a moment with Logain and Merrick, which I thought was really interesting. Of course, in my playthrough, she's dead. I killed her. Just as my woman, Morgan, asked me to. Anyway, but that was a very good scene. What I also like about this book is while it doesn't dive too heavy into it, I think other games will, and other books will dive into it a bit more heavily, perhaps even being set in that setting. We hear a lot about Orlais in the game. We do not get to see a lot of it, but here We get to see a bit more about the politics of the world and a bit more about the Orlesian society before we even get into the game. Now, it's only a small fraction of anything because of the fact that, the first game itself, I don't think really knew too much about the Orlesians because they didn't dive into that. That wasn't a focus of the first game, just like the Qunari are not a big focus of the first game. We have Sten, and all that stuff gets heavily dealt with a whole lot more in Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. But it was interesting to learn more about this world because, with a game that's like 50 plus hours, plus Awakening, plus the other DLCs, you do fairly understand the world that you're inhabiting in Ferelden, in Dragon Age Origins, but it's still, you get talks about what Orleans is like, but you don't get to see it, you don't really get to understand it. Here with Magrenn, since he is from Orleans, and since it's all about the Orlesians and driving them out of Ferelden, you do get a little bit more into their society, which is really interesting. And I'm excited to see any stories that are more heavily presented in Orlais, if there is any. Because I know, Leliana talks about it and stuff, but and other characters in the world talk about it, but it's that thing where it's talked about. You're not shown it, it's not really discussed that heavily. So that's that. There's also a 2-year time jump because we have to develop characters fast. Now, there's a bit of a generic love square going on here where Rowan is this really good woman fighter who's known Merrick since she was a kid. And they're betrothed to one another. They're supposed to be married as they're older. And at the same time, Loghain really likes Rowan. He even tells her such, and she tells him to go away. Later on, we get introduced. There's this mage that is with Magrenn, the king, and he hires this assassin, this bard, this elf to infiltrate. But, as a generic story kind of goes, she actually does fall in love with Merrick. And so that's when, he gets with her, Loghain gets with Rowan. And, that would all be really generic, except what the book does by the end, but we'll get to that. As as Merrick is trying to bolster forces, trying to gain more allies, he goes to talk to a bunch of nobles. And Loghain has this epic, like, Daemon moment from House of Dragon. Or I guess House of the Dragon has a Loghain moment, since this book came out well before even House of the Dragon was written. But, there's this moment where this human noble's talking trash to Merrick. And what makes it even better is because in House of the Dragon, Daemon is, he's in love with Rhaenyra. Whereas in here, I think it's even stronger for the fact that it shows their friendship, because Merrick and Loghain, they're not gay. They're as straight as can be. But they clearly have a good friendship. Not that was necessarily the most morally thing to do, but some guy's talking some trash, and so Loghain slices him down. It's like, you don't talk that way to the king. And it was just a really cool moment. There's also this whole section in Orzammar, or in the Deep Roads, which is something that's in the video game. Not too much to say there. It dives a little bit into dwarven culture. It's also, you can get some dwarves in the story. But by the end of the story, it's a big thing here. We get some revelations. First off, tax evasion. So simple, right? The Orlesians came, said that Loghain's family was not paying their taxes. They beat up Loghain's father, hold him down. They take Loghain's mother, how do you They assault her. The R word. They do that, and then they slit her throat. Do you understand now why in the base game Loghain will not hear about any alliances with the Orlesians? Even if you can't judge an entire people group for the sins of the few. Regardless, understandable why he feels that way. After that, Loghain's father murders the man who did that. And of course they're not paying their taxes because they're on the run. So the simple tax evasion excuse or thing that he said earlier was not the complete truth. Other thing we already knew. But the elf had a change of heart when she fell in love with Merrick. But Merrick finds out that she had been a spy, even if she had changed her ways. And in his anger, kills her. And then, in another expert scene, even though Loghain clearly has strong feelings for Rowan, tells Rowan, you need to be with him now. You need to go be there for him. You must become his queen. And he knew. Because she went to Denerim to kill, or to warn the mage to back off in that, because the mage had hired her. And they learn about that, but Loghain doesn't tell Merrick that part because he wanted him to get that upset. And Rowan realizes this and gets upset with Loghain, even though he's right, that she is the only thing that will keep Merrick strong now that he's lost her. And so they get married out of duty, and Merrick tries to love her as best he can, despite the fact that he was truly in love with the elf. But he stabbed her and killed her. Merrick becomes a bit more colder after that, and they take back Ferelden from the Orlesians. He is now king. The epilogue ends with Cailan being told a story about his father, Cailan being the king that we see in the beginning of Dragon Age Origins. So yeah, overall, really enjoyed this book. Thought it was an easy read, and the standout was Loghain. Loghain was this character that I never really cared about playing Dragon Age Origins, but here, it puts him into a whole new perspective. And he stood out in this book without being center stage. But every time he was in a scene, it felt like this guy steals the show. But yeah, I don't know when next I'll come back to Dragon Age. I have quite a bit of Star Wars to get through. But when next we get here, it will be with Dragon Age The Calling, which deals with a young Duncan, which is the Grey Warden you first meet in Dragon Age Origins. Until next time, guys, may the Maker give you peace. And make sure to defeat the Darkspawn.